Well, welcome everybody. I'm so pleased that so many of you could come this evening, and we are so delighted to have Thomas with you. It's been the whole time I've been here, I've been hoping that we could get you to come and give us a talk about your extraordinary work and design practice. So, just so everyone knows, the part of the reason why Thomas is going to be talking about his work with Ellinikon is because we are also doing a visit, an MGS visit to the park on the 23rd of this month. So it's in conjunction. So we're hearing Thomas's perspective and then we're going to see it in the flesh. And we're just so pleased to have you. And thank you so much. If anyone has any questions or anything, if we do that right at the end. And wonderful. Thank you so much,
Perfect.
Thomas.
It's always a huge pleasure to be here. I think it's the third time speaking, and I do remember visiting the garden, during Sally's time and before, and I just wish I spent more time here. Just one tiny thing, a glass of water, would that be at all possible? So the last time I was here, we kind of spoke about philosophy and work overall. Today we're going to speak more specifically about Ellinikon, and thank you so much. And Ellinikon is a strange animal. It's kind of one of these things that have the body of a lion and wings and the head of a falcon, etc. So I'll try to do it justice by, let's say, looking at it from various angles. The most important thing to say is that it is a work in progress, and very little of it has actually been implemented. So most of it is in the process of implementation. So I'll try to kind of give a bit of background, say where things are today, and then focus on the future. So a very brief history of the site, which many of you might know, is that it was originally, let's say, if we were there 100 years ago, we would see relatively degraded grazing land at the foot of Imitos. It's the whole area is korrymata. It's erosion from Imitos, and in there was a slight, let's say, a more verdant area, which was the Haseki Chtima with two streams, the Trachone stream and the smaller Ellinikon stream. So there were a few more bostani and trees there, etc. And the rest was, from what we know, typical Frigana slopes. And then in the 1920s, with the Asia Minor destruction, you have the first kind of real settlement of the site with two settlements. There's the official Ellinikon settlement, which was a garden city of the time, built something like Psychiko, and it was for Asia Minor refugees that came with property. And then there was also next to it a favela kind of refugee settlement. And then shortly before the war, it becomes the first airport. Athens before that has an airport which is basically in Phaleiro, and it's I think mainly for seaplanes. And then during the war, it's part of the war activity. So there's bombing, etc. And after the war, with the subsequent rapid economic development of Greece, more runways are built. The original runway is actually at a cross, diagonal to what we all remember as the runways. Then the big runways are built by expropriating the land of the Ellinikon garden city. So a bit of that garden city is still left on the western side between the airport and the sea. The rest was expropriated and turned into airport. The airport slowly progressed. The very famous and beautiful, in my memory, Aerosarin terminal was built in the 70s. And then in the sort of 80s and 90s, it was decided that the airport would move. Um, I don't remember exactly. I think that the actual planning started in 80 something. Moving the airport happened in 1999, so Sparta opened, and the same night Ellinikon closed down. And having a very long-standing fascination with this site, which we studied as part of a Harvard Design Studio in 1995. I was there on the night that the airport closed and it moved to the new airport. So I remember the last flight landing and then people slowly picking up, putting things on cars, and the same night moving everything except the dogs, basically, to the new site. So what was left there? I mean, we know as a state and a society for the past 30 almost years that the site was going to be empty, but it took a while for the state to go through various paces to lead to a future use of the site. And in the meantime, the site was kind of lay fallow and slowly started overgrowing, which of course we as ecologists find extremely beautiful. And also, a lot of flora and a bit of fauna entered. So there are, fox pairs with their kids, and falcons, etc. So the state did a number of things for the site and held an international design competition in 2003, and then there was a winner, an Organismos Athinas, which was the official body that used to supervise the planning of metropolitan Athens, which has since been cancelled, has been sort of shut down, was responsible for the site, but somehow there was never the impetus and the money and the know-how and what it takes, and maybe the political will for the airport to be developed as public land. Then Greek economy started going down the hill, which also didn't help. But I would say that since around 2006, 2007, it was clear that the state would not be developing the land, and the state started looking for other ways, and eventually held an international competition, which was a development competition, which had two parts: a developer, obligatorily in collaboration with a Pritzker Prize-winning architect, to propose something which would both be an excellent design for the site and also a workable development scenario for the site. Various things happened. There's economics, politics involved, and finally the competition was won by Lambda Development, who I think was the only Greek development firm among those competing, and we were fortunate to be on Lambda's team together with Foster and Partners out of London, and Charles Anderson out of the US, and a number of other people from the time of the competition. So we've been on this for, I'd say, the past 10 years. And as each person and each team plays a specific goal. We are the green people and we are the sustainability people, and it's something we believe in deeply and have for a very long time. And we're all living in a world recently where sustainability, humanity is realizing that sustainability is extremely important, and humanity has kind of, the planet has kind of gotten together and put together these 17 UN sustainability goals. But of course, sustainability is not a completely new thing. So this is Jackie, whose house this is, and she and her, I'd say, milieu of people were thinking about sustainability and very, I would say that their thinking on sustainability has nothing to, is in no way inferior to current thinking about sustainability. They were way ahead of their time. Unfortunately, it took a long time for the planet to catch up. So the Sparoza garden is a very early and very good lesson in sustainability. And I would say that in terms of my personal story, I think growing up as Konstantinos Doxiadis, with whom Jackie was working, was very sick at the end of his life and died when I was very small. But I remember him, and I certainly grew up in the places that he created and in his environment and group of people. And I think that there's this kind of legacy that we get from the 60s about what the world should be in both ecological and social terms that is very much alive. It kind of, I think it was ignored for a little while, and now the world is coming back to it. So what we ask ourselves when it's time to make public spaces and a park such as Ellinikon are which of these sustainability goals can we actually, are applicable, because not all of them are. And if a goal is even marginally applicable or not applicable in the design, but it's applicable in the construction process, we should pay heed and see what is the best that we can do about it. So good health and well-being, certainly open spaces and parks are one of the most important infrastructures for health, mental and physical health and well-being in a city. And it's important to understand that when talking about a park is not a bosque, it's not an alsos, it's not maybe what some older parks of Athens were meant to do, which is provide a bit of a feeling of nature for a limited amount of people. A park for a city of 4 to 5 million is an important bit of infrastructure which has to provide a lot of the things that Athenians can't do, sort of open air things. Then quality education, in the sense that by creating spaces we're actually educating people, and we're certainly educating the next generation about what is important in life. And I'll show some of that in the next slides. Decent work and economic growth has to do with two parts of Ellinikon. One is that when the state decided that it was not going to turn the whole area into a park, which was kind of the original vision, and it was going to develop the area, it was because of a need to provide not just open space, but economic development and jobs. The other part of the picture is that this, very big project is being designed and constructed by something like 50,000 people. That's the projection through its history, and it's important for these people to be, well paid and fairly treated, down to the actual, guys from Pakistan and Afghanistan who are planting the plants. So it's important for the whole chain to be well. And I think certainly a way we as an office think of our work, both the narrow confines of the design but also the broader implication of the work, is that what we do has multiple stakeholders, multiple clients. So our client isn't just Lambda or the Athenian public, but our clients are also the existing vegetation on a site and how that's treated, the new vegetation which will come on a site, the existing animals on the site, the animals that you hope will come to the site, the people who will come to the site, the people who work on the site. All of these are constituencies to which we have responsibilities to do the best we can. Next comes the industry, innovation and infrastructure, in the sense that Ellinikon is a chance for Greece to, let's say, learn some new tricks from international best practice, but also develop some local knowledge of best practice, and that fortunately has already been happening. So we as an office have had a chance to do things that we would otherwise not have been able to do because of the scale and the resources of Ellinikon, but also because of the challenges. It's, you have to solve problems that you don't find in other kinds of projects, and certainly because of the nature of this being a huge project with hundreds of offices, many of them international, many of them very top internationally, and of the project having very high requirements in terms of how documents are organized and controlled. very high requirements in terms of BIM design, which is basically, let's say, smart object-oriented design, etc. We're really seeing that the Greek design firms and subsequently the Greek construction firms are building up. It's like you're doing exercise. It hurts when you're doing it, but then you're healthier and stronger. So most of us are really hurting right now, to tell you the truth. But we also know that we're able to run, the 1,000 meters and then the 5,000 meters and then the half marathon and eventually the marathon. That's what it feels like currently. Reduced inequalities is a very important. We live in a democracy, and I think for most of us, it's important that we hold it dear. But in order for democracies to work, they have certain prerequisites. And one of the prerequisites, as stated by John Rawls, which is sort of one of the political thinkers that I most strongly believe in, is that for a democracy to work, people have to be able to talk to each other in a way that they understand each other. And I think what we're seeing in a place such as the US right now is that people are talking past each other. They cannot, they don't understand each other anymore because they're too far apart. So what John Rawls says, who was an American, very important American theorist of political theorist, he says, if you're going to be able as a society to sit together around the table and not just argue but find solutions, you have to understand the other's point of view. And a very important part of that is physical coexistence. So if you have a society where, some people live in their ghetto and some people live in their ghetto and, other groups live in their ghetto and they never get together physically, let alone mentally, it's going to be much more difficult for these groups to function together politically and democratically. And as we know, the internet has helped in certain ways, in the sense that you can communicate more easily and fluently, but you usually tend to do that with people who are thinking the same way as you do. So that's where physical space becomes extremely important, and where digital space is failing us, which is that physical space, you don't really decide, unless you're in your ghetto, you don't decide who's going to be next to you, which is where spaces which are truly collective spaces, where people from every part of Athens come together, from Syndama Square to Ellinikon Park, which has exactly that mentality in mind, become very important. And I know that there's a lot of justified worry. Will Ellinikon in fact be an open place? But it will be. It's being planned to be a draw for all Athenians. And a significant aspect of that is that it's served by a lot of public transportation. Then sustainable cities and communities. Obviously, we're going to talk about the various ways in which a park can and is planning to be sustainable. We won't talk about the other elements of sustainability in Ellinikon that have to do with residential, etc., because it's, we would just be here too long. Responsible consumption of production during the construction stage. So how do you use materials when you're constructing, and then how do you use and dispose of materials after construction? And then climate action, of course, in two ways. First is climate change mitigation. I hope that we're all convinced that climate change exists, even if we're not convinced about how, to what percentage it's human caused, what is Earth cycles, but it's here and we have to deal with it. So part of dealing with it is mitigation, which is seeing how we can decrease the rate of climate change. And the second is adaptation, which is, climate change is already here. How can we make spaces and parks and cities better suited for the climate that is coming? Then we have life on land, which is our responsibility towards all the living organisms, from humans all the way down to fungi that are going to live in the park, and the plants, and partnership for the goals, which means that for all of us to reach these goals, we we won't get very far if we strive for them individually. So we have to kind of get together in multiple overlapping groups. And one of these groups is the group of people that are working on, or the subgroups that are working on the various Ellinikon projects. So making these goals even more specific for the parks, we talk about creating a regenerative system and a system that is resilient, which means something that you don't have to maintain all the time in order to make it live, but to set it up so that it will live by itself as well as possible with not too many human inputs. And that includes restoring natural resources that actually already exist on site. It's designing with nature and culture, so taking into account and protecting cultural identity, regional identity, the urban elements and the spatial experiences of the park. And that's important because it's not a no man's land. It has a certain history. So in designing for the future, part of that history needs to be valorized. And again, as an office, all of us live our lives based on certain values. One of our values is respect. So respect for what is already there. If you already have this amazing house, made by Jackie, don't come in thinking, what can I tear down and how can I change it? First, understand it really, really well. And then if you really think that you need to improve something, do it in a careful way. So that is the overall mentality of design. Enhancing human well-being, reconnecting with nature, experiencing natural systems, recognizing the value of landscape, making Athenians really, value parks and landscapes, but also natural landscapes, strengthen community through social interaction, with areas that really attract people, and also foster interactions with nature, and then ensure preservation, conservation, and regeneration, ensure accessibility and safety for all visitors, and I will now talk slightly a bit how projects from the past have given us some lessons learned that go directly into the project, because many times we look at the project and we see it as a standalone, but in fact there are things that come from everyone's past. We call them lessons learned, and some of them have been learned through failure, I would say, and then you try to do things better the next time. So one of the important lessons learned is designing for people. And the person who is our main inspiration for that is Jan Gehl, who is a Danish designer, who is very... I'm always surprised that, he's not already known by everyone, because he writes and actually practices the most sensible way of designing places for people. And a typical example he gives is, parks or streets where benches are set up. There's a bench here, there's a bench here, and there's a bench there. And when you look at that, you realize that the best thing you could do on that bench is sit and eat a sandwich, and maybe someone sits next to you, but it's basically, you can't build community with single benches facing usually out to, you need to build communal spaces. So, for example, we've learned this by doing little projects in Athenian space where they're kind of made for people to kind of hang out and get together, and I'll show you what that means nowadays. Then it's reducing, reusing, and recycling, which is something humanity has been saying for the last 20 years, but now we all kind of really need to do it. And Athenian is a recycled city. It's a city to a large degree, especially historic Athens, was recycled versions of its older stones. We were called to do a small park in the center of Athens on Dimosio Sima, on top of antiquities, and we had a lot of limitations, and it had to be built with basically it was a week of design, a week of construction, and 3,000 euros. That was all that was available. So of mentality and of necessity, we reused most of the construction materials that we found on site and demolished from the old houses that we found there. And the little park was built out of these, things that actually old workmen know how to do perfectly. These old guys know exactly what it is to just take down an old wall and make a new one. And it's the kind of aesthetic that we passionately wanted to bring to Ellinikon, and it's actually a bit of a conundrum, because you have Lambda, who is undertaking a very risky undertaking. I know, we can imagine from, that they will make billions to that they will go bankrupt, but in fact, it is that way. They can really easily go bankrupt, which is what happened to the first group that tried to redo the Docklands in London, for example. These are really, really risky investments, and they need a certain amount of pizzazz and a certain kind of chic quality, so that they will manage to attract people and sell. So when you talk about this aesthetic of recycling things, there's a kind of a difficulty to reconcile that with the need to make something that looks very lush and very rich, etc. But exactly, it's this kind of reconciliation among, and balancing of the various needs of such a complex enterprise, which in the end is successful. So learning about plant communities, we've been working for the last 20-something years, and I've had the chance to talk quite often and the Mediterranean Garden Society has definitely been an inspiration and a source of knowledge as we've been developing our way of treating native plants. But basically, I would say that the basis of our thinking is that we don't think of plant compositions, but we think of plant communities. So, groupings that can work as mini ecosystems, both for the plants and also for the fauna that can come, and then starting almost, I'd say, 20 years ago, working with the very small nurseries to propagate real natives, and of course also working with Olivier Philippi and getting a lot of knowledge through the years from Olivier, and also running experiments such as this experiment in Milos that we're running with a small Milos nursery and Olivier, where we've been testing over the period of 4 years which plants can survive with zero irrigation on Milos, which has 200 to 300 mil of rain a year, which is basically officially desert conditions. So there's knowledge which is being built up, and which is very important if you think that eventually we're doing a park of 2,000 stremata, 2 million square meters, and millions of plants. So if you get things wrong, it's a problem, pushing the ecological agenda and doing things as forward-thinking as possible, but also playing it safe. You have to do both. Then one of the things we've learned through our years of working is what we call scaffolds, which is we've seen that if you create the conditions, the scaffolding, for natural things to do their own thing, then you're good. So we actually, our thinking is it's more important to create the right conditions than to necessarily put in the right plants or do the right kind of intensive maintenance. So, for example, soil is extremely important. Water collection is extremely important. Creating plant communities that will work kind of symbiotically with each other is extremely important, because ultimately, as societies, we will need to green our cities more and more, and we can't have, I don't think, well, maybe we could, but I don't think we will have thousands or tens of thousands of people doing maintenance, especially in Greece, I just think we won't. So we really have to make things that will take care of themselves and will be resilient. So this kind of scaffolding, this is just an example from a biennale that we did. But the idea of creating, these skeletons of good conditions and then letting the plants take over is very important. Then, of course, soils, maybe the most important of all the elements when it comes to planting. And there, I would say we as an office and our collaborators and humanity is kind of, I'd say, we've traversed the first 10 meters of something that is 100 or 1,000 meters long. I think soils is a big lesson for now and for the future. And we're learning a lot. We spent a lot of time learning about the mycelium and the sort of fungus side of soils, and now we're investing more and more time and energy into learning more and more about the whole kind of soil ecosystems. And I think one of the biggest wake up moments that I had in my life is when I realized that soil is not a material, soil is a living mega organism, basically. Playing around with fungi. And then we kind of now come to the very first stage of the actual project, which is the Experience Park. It's out of the 2,000 stremata, or 2 million square meters of the overall park. Lambda decided that about 80 stremata, or 80,000 square meters, was going to be phase A, with two goals. One goal would be to kind of start opening Ellinikon to Athenians and creating a draw towards Ellinikon, but also to start experimenting with all the things that are going to be done in the future bigger stages of the park. So this is a testing ground. So immediately we fell in love with. No, this is okay. Sorry. If you remember the first photos that I showed of these rather poetic large areas of concrete or asphalt with Iparenia and other plants sticking through. So we love these deeply, and for various reasons, the first part of the project is about keeping as much of this old materiality as possible. Part of it is ecological, because obviously this material has tons of embodied CO2 and embodied energy, and you don't want to kind of destroy it and then do something else in its place. And part of it is cultural, because this part of the park, which is the first, is also around the old airport, the old military hangars, which are some of the buildings that are preserved from the old airport, and the whole area is under Ministry of Culture jurisdiction. So this is a part of the park which has to be more about the old airport than other parts of the park, and you will see that as I show the future of the park. So there's a lot of retaining of existing materials, such as the old concrete and the old asphalt, use of paint, which is kind of the easiest way to enliven something that is old and make people appreciate it, but also something that comes from the history of the airport, because on this side you have the painted strips that they used to put the airplanes in. They have to follow, the airplanes have to follow this to get to their eventual parking spot, and we kind of used this idea to direct people in and around the park. Then we were fortunate that the actual aprons where the airplanes park were made of beautiful 1950s concrete. So concrete that is, plus or minus 25 centimeters thick, without reinforcement, which means there's no rusting iron in there. So you can just, and with very good quality cement, and with very beautiful marble skyra, marble gravel, I guess you would call it. This has the beauty of the old Athenian floors that are now coming back into fashion. So we used a lot of it by cutting it into strips and turning it into benches that you will see, or other sculptural elements. Unfortunately, the way you do this, which is aδιατάρακτη κοπή, it's basically cutting it with diamond saws, and after every X meters you have to change the diamond saw bit. It's a very costly process. So you can use some of this material treated in this very refined and beautiful way, but most of the material you break with a big hammer, this big kind of excavators coming with a big hammer, and they go boop, 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 and they break it very easily. And what that does is it turns it into big blocks that are basically stone. It's because concrete is an artificial stone. We humans, we go up into the mountains, we take the asbestolithos, the limestones, we burn it at high temperatures, we turn that into cement. We mix it with sand, which is stone, and stone, which is stone, and we turn it into a new kind of artificial stone. So what that allowed us to do is that it allowed for stonemasons. We actually used traditional stonemasons that use this as stone. So we built calderimia out of it, we built benches, we built walls. So the material that you see here is not stone, it's the actual reused concrete worked by the mastores as stone, and there's a lot of that going on. And then we thought, if we can do that to concrete, let's try to do it to the asphalt as well. So we kind of took chunks of asphalt that were ripped out of some places, because underlying all of this is that it's an area that had a lot of hardscape. It had a lot of concrete and asphalt because planes were moving through. And a lot of that had to be removed because it is becoming a park after all. And a lot of it remains because it's a park for people and you want spaces for them to move and do other things. So we said, we're removing asphalt. Could we try the same trick and see if the stonemasons can build calderimi, sort of flagstone pavings out of asphalt? And the answer is yes. And it works perfectly and it looks beautiful. And there's one thing I've learned about asphalt recently. I was in Louisa Jones was nice enough to, she gathers a group of people once in a while and we discuss things. And Gilles Clément, who is, I think, maybe my main inspiration from the very beginning of practice, he said, guys, we've been finding out, especially lately, that asphalt is excellent for tree growth because it functions as mulch. It actually retains a lot of moisture, and because of the way that it heats in the day, kind of draws moisture up, and then it cools. It really helps the trees. And he was showing us photos of the same area where they planted trees, some of them in what was soil and some in what was asphalt, and how much better the trees in the asphalt were doing. So changing. We have. I keep thinking that we're blind. We're blind and we're slowly learning things, but we're children. We have so much to learn. We think we know things. We need to keep rethinking and re-examining. So it was a very nice, surprise and a very pleasant experiment to do nice things with the asphalt as well. One of the other things we did is that where we needed to lay down new asphalt, we frezarame in English. We scraped it with fresa. Yeah.
Rotavator.
With a rotavator, yes, exactly. So we rotavated it with a normal rotavator, and we got the top very black layer off. And what that does is it brings out all the beauty of the little stones which are in the asphalt anyway. So you go around Greece, you go around the mountains, you look at old asphalt roads. They're beautiful because the thick layer of gum asphalt has evaporated, and what you have left underneath is beautiful gravel held together by old asphalt. So it's light gray rather than black, which means that it has a much lower albedo and it doesn't suck up so much heat. And it's much more beautiful. So that's what we did with the asphalt there as well, but we did it by rotavating. Then, of course, reusing trees, so leaving as many of the existing eucalypts on site as we could, and eucalypts are not native, so kind of they're not kosher for Ellinikon, but since most of the plants going in are going to be native, and this is millions of plants, the idea is that when you have a few hundreds of old trees, even if they're not native, you respect them, you use them. And then the olive trees, which have an interesting history because most of them originally came from the development of the Markopoulo Hippodromos, the racing track, which started to be constructed for the Olympics around 2001, I think. And at that time, I was working for the organizing committee and kind of managed to convince the powers that it'd be not to cut down the trees but to transplant them. So we had the first big transplanting of almost 600 trees from Markopoulo, and a lot of them went to Ellinikon, and they went to the Ellinikon Olympic site. So half of the airport was redeveloped as an Olympic site. I've failed to say that previously, and there are many hundreds of trees, and now as that Olympic site is being decommissioned as an Olympic site and turned into a park, or other bits of the development, we're taking those trees and using them in the park again. So it's a third life for these same trees. So the main trees in the park, and you will see them, are olive trees, after multiple transplants, and reusing things such as the amazing Iparenias. So we obviously the aesthetic of big fields of weeds, which is how most people perceive the wild grasses, is not something that you would go for in a chic park. But we kind of found a balance where we were able to retain big enough areas of them, so you see this kind of existing plants. And this is a nice summary that I won't go into. And then in terms of designing for people specifically for the park, it has to do with bringing things that will make people come. And we realized, I think, about 30 years ago, that the most important and most underserved constituency in Athenian space for outdoor space are kids. So, Athenians who grew up in the 50s could play in the Alana, but Athenians who grew up in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, etc., at best they have a really shoddy playground and a little platea in the Gitonia. So kids, and kids for their proper development need physical, they need to be physical. So part of our development as humans and our mental development is through our physical development. So kids do not have a correct mental development if they cannot have a correct physical development, a physical interaction, which is where open air spaces and playgrounds are so important in cities. And what is clear for us is that playgrounds that have things that kids love, but also things that kids, parents want to keep away, the kids away from, like dirt, and places where you can scrape your knee, and places where you get wet. A lot of these playgrounds, which are just sheets of plastic with playground equipment, are abhorrent to us because what kind of kids will these be if they grow up in these plastic places? So the playground has two main themes. There's a theme which is airport, clearly. There's the main theme, which is nature, because it is in an area of big trees. And a very other important element is the water feature, and that was an existing. There were previously 4 hangars on the site. One of them was decommissioned, and it left a big concrete plaza. And we thought, well, we'll keep it as a plaza, but we will make it a huge water feature that people, and especially kids, can play with. And it's, I would say, the element that has been most heavily designed and is also the most expensive element of this particular park. But it's also, I think, the one that is going to have the biggest, already from day one, has had the biggest impact and will continue having the biggest impact kind of through to whenever. Hopefully the park will be around for hundreds of years. Then in terms of the plant communities, We have, meaning bringing new plants in. It's mainly a lot of frigana and resilient trees. So the trees are carobs, pinus, olive trees, etc. So it's a relatively limited palette of trees which are going to be very are going to be very resilient. And fortunately, the park is receiving good maintenance, and things are growing correctly. One problem with the park is that the whole site of Ellinikon has extremely high calcium. So the soils are actually really difficult soils, and we've done a few things to amend the soils, but you can do so much. So then it comes to selecting the right plant communities for the soil, clearly. There's one thing that I don't have a good slide for, which is the way that water is being retained on site. So because it's the right thing to do, but also because the park is being it's getting the site certification, which is the landscape equivalent to the LEED certification. A very important thing is what you do with storm water. So we know Athens, you get storms, you get floods, and it's just going to get worse. So what's happening? This is already a sloped site that is shedding some of its water, but in various places we've created depressions that collect the water and have more water-loving plants, and these are the rain gardens. And I'm really sorry that it seems to be the wrong picture here. Back to designing for people. So the idea that seating is creates grouping, the idea that you have draws such as the water element. So there's a lot of this, very simple seating, but which is about bringing people together and creating smaller scales. I think you will see, how a big square turns into little smaller squares that foster a smaller scale of community. Obviously, the kids absolutely adore the fountain, and that's bringing. That's bringing everyone to the site, and we are seeing, what we hope to see is that you really see kind of all cultural and economic groups coming and mixing, and we hope that when the big park opens, you'll have even more of that. And the playgrounds, and then a few, there are the very social areas which are about people getting together, but sometimes you also want to go to a park to get away from it all. So there are also planned moments of solitude here and there, which is sort of what you more traditionally find in the park. In terms of water use, no pictures to show, but basically there's the main way that water is used responsibly in the park is through the use of course, drought-tolerant vegetation, through the use of rain gardens to recharge the aquifer, but also through the eventual use of sewage. So the park will be the first big park in Greece to be watered by sewage. But that's a long way coming, because there's a big sewage treatment plant which is being built as part of the development on the south of the site, which is going to take all the sewage coming from South Athens, separate it into effluent and clean effluent and the other stuff, and then water the park. And I think there's going to be enough water for the surrounding municipalities as well. Then in terms of microclimate, a lot of things happening through shade, through what I talked about the asphalt, etc. And educating and changing mentalities. So, our mentality has changed through the years, and as we've been doing these projects, and we try to communicate these things to the people who come, so that it becomes part of the new story, and especially kids understand that cities are not just a concrete jungle, but there are many other things that we need to do for the future, for the good of ourselves and of the planet. So that is where we are today. That's as far as we've come, and now we come to tomorrow, which is the opening of the big park, the big part of the park. So what I've shown up to now has been our design as an office. Now we come to the work mainly done by Sasaki, which is again a company established in Boston in the 1960s by Hideo Sasaki, who was part of these kind of 1960s early ecologists, and they've remained a good office ever since, and they're the main park designers, and we are the local they're local partners. So most of what I'm going to show is a lot of it is work that we on the Greek side has been developing for decades. A lot of it is work that they on their American side have been developing for decades, and things have kind of come together. So this is an overall view of the development, and what you see here is that the main part of the park okay, perfect. This bit is the main part of the park, and the other bits are development. In fact, Ellinikon is planned as a kind of green city or green suburb where greenery is an important part of the whole development. But in fact, what's happened, and I think in this way, the Greek state did something quite smart, I would say. So you have 6 million square meters, 6,000 stremata, 600 hectares. Okay, a third, by law, a third is park. A third is public open space, such as roads, sidewalks, little squares, etc. And a third is actual development. That's roughly what the numbers are. So there's a lot of open space and a lot of green. And of what you're seeing here is sort of the main green spines. So you see the park, and you see an area of the park here, which is sort of grayed out because it's the sports field, but it's just because it's outside of Sasaki's scope, but it's still part of the park. Then a lot of these kind of fingers going out into the neighborhoods and coming down to the seaside and going up to Vouliagmenis. And then this whole area, which is, let's call it the coastal park, which is not part of the official park. It's part of the other 1/3 of the development. So the park per se that we'll now talk about is this central bit, kind of the central bit of the starfish. And there are it's currently under development. It will start. Construction is not too far away. So in the next few months, the contractor will be selected, and they will start preliminary work. I think we're looking at about 2 to 3 years for the opening of the first phase, because this is huge. So 2 million square meters is huge. It's opening in phases. So there's there's a first little phase that already opened, which is the Experience Park. Then there's the next stage, the next stage, the next stage. So the main there are some main ideas behind the park, which are similar to what I've described before, which is that it needs to be a place that is strongly about nature and strongly about culture at the same time. And by culture, we don't mean museums; we mean bringing people who do things. So it's strongly about people and strongly about nature, and bringing the two things together. And I think this is one of the images that kind of shows how a balance between spaces of strong human use and spaces that are very green kind of come together. In terms of underlying values and thinking, one part is the revival and enhancing of historic elements. This particular example is in front of the Saarinen terminal, which eventually will be some sort of cultural space. That's its legal designation, so it might be a museum or something like that. What's been created in front of Saarinen is a very big, I'd say, almost a ceremonial lawn, because this is a ceremonial building. Saarinen set it up with the principles of a Doric temple. Basically, that's what it is. It's a rethinking of the Doric temple, and it has a main face towards the sea. So the park is kind of lush and green, and when it comes to that, it kind of opens up and creates a big open alley, I would say, which comes from the phase of the design of a previous phase of the design, which was Foster and Partners and Charles Anderson, and now Sasaki have kind of added richness to that and have made it a very active space with a lot happening. And of course, you see in each of these drawings identifying many of the features that I mentioned before and that we've been testing, such as pavements from the locally sourced concrete of the airport, creating big community spaces such as event lawns. So always there's a question of the lawn and the grass. So it's kept to a minimum, but you still need some of it, because if you want a space where people can actually roll on the ground and lie on the ground, and lawn is still more or less the only option we have. So something to keep in mind. So it's not, we're not being, let's say, ultra orthodox about ecology and native. You also need to create certain things which are good for people, but at the right balance. Okay. Then the very important broader ecological story of connecting the mountains and the sea, which has been very clear for the past 30 years, that Ellinikon, Imitos has been cut off from the sea and its whole connection, and Ellinikon can start to reestablish that, and eventually through Argyroupoli, hopefully you will start at the sea and walk all the way up and through to Imitos, and you will also have ecotopes and species moving through. A mentality which is in many cases not a garden-making mentality, but an ecological restoration mentality. So there are parts of the park which are clearly thought of, as a garden, where things are carefully put in place, intended, but other places where it's more about setting up the scaffolding, setting up the right parameters, and then, for example, seeding. And in terms of seeding, there is a team from the University of Patras, with Panagiotis Dimopoulos, who's one of the top ecologists in Greece, who is collecting seeds from Imitos, and these seeds partly will be propagated for plants that will be planted by hand in a gardening sense, and partly for seed mixes that will be used to seed large areas. And again, also, learning the lessons of things that were already growing by themselves in the old airport. What we're all calling systems-based thinking, which is that, rather than coming to an area and trying to think of it as by itself, or thinking it as a beautiful picture, this very big thing is being thought of as systems. So a system that allows people to move around, paths, a path system. A system that allows people to do activities. So, activities, in various places of this path system. A system that allows water to drain properly through the site and be collected. A system that irrigates. A system for the maximum possible regeneration of the streams. And what's interesting, as anyone who deals with plants and nature knows, is that if you do something right, something else goes right, and then that helps the first thing, and these systems help each other. So it's kind of this idea of a symbiotic relationship of setting up things that will eventually, each thing will help the other thing become better and better, rather than the antibiotic thinking of a traditional, not a traditional, kind of a modern place that is maintained with, a lot of gas motors, etc. And specifically here we see that about 70% of the park will be given over to what we all understand as nature, and approximately 30% will be given over to what we understand as culture or human uses, and the two will come together. More examples. This is the entrance from Vouliagmenis, which is it has the character. This is you have two metro stations, the Ellinikon and the Argyroupoli metro station, plus Vouliagmenis, and that's going to bring most of the people to the park. And this is before you reach the actual park. This is a let's say one of the public areas, and you will be received by some things that are like very big plazas with tall trees, because you have again a lot of people moving through, and gradually as you move through these spaces you will come to more and more, to less and less dense areas, to more and more natural areas. So you go from great human density to gradually less human density and more natural density as you go through the park. Here you have the reuse of the canoe and kayak Olympic pond, so that infrastructure is still there. I don't know if you will be able to visit it. And rather than it being scrapped, it's being turned into a freshwater lake, which is going to be fully functioning. It's going to be an ecosystem, so the water will be oxygenated, and there will be the establishment of vegetation and marine life in the lake to make it a real ecosystem. And clearly it will be a nice place to hang out. And in terms of water management, pretty much mentioned most of the things, but what you see here in the picture is the much bigger kind of rain gardens and gullies that are being created to collect and hold storm water, as well as the fact that most of the water is going to come from recycled water. Greening the industry means that there's been a lot of work done already from the design stage, working with the nursery people to find out from them what are the best plants and best practices, but also to push them in certain directions, to say, that we as a project will be requiring these kinds of things, and maybe you should start to increase the quality or the level, or have more natives, or get prepared to prepare propagation of natives, etc. The idea that gradually an urban forest will be created of approximately 30,000 new trees, with an expectation that there will be, a lot of animals that will come from the surrounding area. First the birds, because it's the easiest thing, but eventually we might even get the wild boars, which have, they've come this far. They will eventually make it down to Ellinikon as well. And the idea that if you were there, because really we're creating something now, but we're creating it for the next, 50, 100, 200 years. Think of the National Garden, they made it 200 years ago, and now we're enjoying it. So I think what we will all see for the first years is the beginning of something that will really, we're going to see a baby, basically, and that baby will grow into something wonderful with time. And there's certainly the thought behind this of creating a forest and an ecosystem that will develop and and be resilient over time. And there's this idea of shaping a park for 1,000 years, but definitely the deep time of things is very important in planning this park. And there's also there's been a testing of the carbon input into the actual construction of the park, and there's a rough calculation that it's going to take about 35 years until carbon neutrality, because whatever we do, you're just not walking into an airport. The airport is partly being demolished to construct a park. So even with the best intentions, you are spending energy and burning fossil fuels. Fortunately, the more and more it's not fossil fuels, it's other things. But this energy that's going to be incorporated into the park is going to be offset in about 35 years, which, depending on your perspective, might be a long time or a short time. And again, the tools you used to make this calculation are proprietary. Sasaki is developing them, and as everything, they're in the early stage. So it's interesting to think that all of us are kind of pioneers in the sea change that's happening in humanity, where after 200 or 300 years where industrialization was at the paradigm, now the paradigm is, okay, how are we not going to mess things up for the future? And then of course the reuse of materials, not only in ecological terms but also cultural terms. How do you keep the memory of the materials of the place? And how do you then make places? So, for example, the main square of the park that is coming in the future is going to use scaled up versions of the various tests that we've done with the concrete in the small park. And in the end, there'll be many kilometers of walkway and thousands of square meters of planting, and partial ecological restoration of the streams. Why? Because legislation in Greece still almost forces you to treat streams as culverts rather than ecological systems. So there's hopefully this will be the first step to a paradigm shift of not, and the Erasinos story here with all the fight behind not turning it into a culvert but keeping it as a living river. This is hopefully going to start changing mentalities, and that's where we are. So thank you, and please, any questions or comments or thoughts?